You're listening to Masters Decoded podcast series. I'm your host and the chief decoder, Anis Merchant. Through this podcast, I bring in guests who are successful in a different walk of life to decode and map out their careers and journeys with the hope that we gain all our learnings. The world around us is changing exponentially, and how the impact of artificial intelligence, technology, and other socio-economic factors have either influenced or enhanced my guests' careers. In today's episode, I invite Saket Sethi. Saket, an architect, designer, a TV host, and had a career of modeling too. Saket Sethi is currently the founder and principal of Archilogics in Mumbai and Barcelona, a collective of Avant Garde designers redefining contextual future living from a historical perspective for an international audience. He's the only Indian architect who has hosted 2 TV shows simultaneously, disseminating the latest Indian design with NDTV GoodTimes, Luxe Interiors, and a celebrity design chat show with a makeover for Fox Live's Design HQ Season 2. Saket has a Bachelor of Architecture from Woodbury University, Los Angeles, studied digital design at UC Berkeley, and in interior design at NYU. During the episode, I have realized that Saket is more than an architect. To find out more, and without much further ado, let me get on with it. Hi Saket, welcome to Masters Decoded podcast series. Thanks for taking time out.
Thank you for having me here.
Saket, a model, an anchor, an architect, and a host for certain shows on NDTV GoodTimes. Different careers intertwined in what you do. You want to share a little bit about that, what your background is and how all these intertwine?
Okay. Well, essentially, I'm an architect.
Okay.
And I've always wanted to be an architect. So there's been no doubt in that area. But I think the path and the process to getting to be a practicing architect has kind of led me into many different things. And I organically went towards whatever happened. I won't say that there wasn't a desire to go outside and expand the umbrella of what you think an architect can do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's been the way that I would have liked it to be without knowing how to get to it. I got to experience those things.
Very interesting. And you also did your undergrad in US. And was that part of the architect journey which you wanted to take, like go and get education specifically in the area?
I think, again, that was organic. So I was studying architecture in a program here in Mumbai.
Okay.
And I think after the second year, I just started to get these pangs that I was missing out on something and I needed a completely different experience. And I think when you're doing an undergrad experience, say in the US, you are in a different city, you're in a different environment, the experimental think tank around you is completely different. Usually when you're here, you're just focused on your program and you don't study a city or you don't study people or you don't study the environment. You don't get this, let's say, more all-rounded educational perspective. So, you don't study psychology or you don't study the arts as one would. So I also had this visual imagery always in my head. I don't know where it came from. Palm trees and brick piers and these avenues and this LA and California. And I'd never been out of the country, actually. I'd never even been out of the country on a holiday. And I think the first time that I left India was to go study in LA. I just gave up everything and I went for it. So I think it's a combination of somewhere having some instinct or intuition about the fact that I wanted a particular kind of learning experience and somewhere the reality that the learning experience I was in right now wasn't what I wanted for 5 years of my life.
Okay.
So that's how I went to the US.
And as an architect, typically that word architect has evolved many years now, and today there are architect is not just looked upon as somebody who will remodel your house or do your new house or any of that. There are much more grandeur, uh, you know, sculptures or you know, I would say structures being put together by many greats. So, what's your style of architecture, or when you like you spoke about design and art and you know the psychology behind what's being done? What's your taste, or what's your specific which differentiates you as compared to everyone else?
I think when I started my practice, I had this very clear goal that for 10 years I was just going to experiment.
Okay.
I was going to try my hand at different kinds of projects and different scales of projects. If you see in my portfolio, I have, a master plan, which is a 22-acre master plan and a science and technology campus. I also have an office for Salman, and I have a home for Ravina.
Mm-hmm.
And the styles of the projects are completely different. The response and the context and the delivery is different. The typology is different. And I think that when you start your career, you have each architect has these choices and these directional ideas about what kind of career they want to build based on what interests them. And for me, I think everything interested me. So I wanted to do residential. I also wanted to do an office. I also wanted to build a home. I also wanted to design a little mini city. And all of those came together. I wanted to work with furniture, and I wanted to work abroad. So I think the first 10 years just went to understanding the craft and understanding what kind of a skill set and abilities I had, because sometimes, you're very ambitious and you want to do things and you're not really prepared or appropriate for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so gathering that experience, and when the 10 years were over, I asked myself what I wanted at that point. And there were two things I think that became clear. One is that I wanted to go abroad and do things in a work scenario abroad rather than just go visit or, go to design shows and go to design events and just be part of that, but really kind of get down and dirty and build something or do a project or a renovation. And so that happened when I set up in Barcelona, and so I was in Barcelona for about 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
shuttling back and forth. And the other thing that I really was very interested in doing, which I got to do, was to start doing design TV. And that idea
Yep.
really was disseminating and discussing design and sharing my excitement about design and interiors and architecture with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened at the right time because at that time shows were being created and I was being talked to for that, and it worked out. And so I think you get a chance to for each architect to put together this blueprint literally about what kind of architect you want to be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then you maybe set out some key milestones, and as you're working towards them, you start to evolve. And so I think for me, what I've realized as an architect is that I'm definitely somebody who brings a sense of adventure in the work. Like, you won't see this standard formula in my work.
Yep.
Maybe you won't even be able to recognize my work, but I've developed that work specifically for a context,
Mm-hmm.
specifically for a particular client. And after this design journey of about 15 years, I've realized that what I'm most interested in, what I love the most, and what kind of architect I am is definitely someone who is putting sustainability and green and high tech with classic things together.
Mm-hmm.
So the new work that I've been developing the last 4 years is oriented towards sustainability. We built the largest private residential green roof in India,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a project that I've been super excited about. And we can talk more about that at length in another question set, I guess.
Yeah.
But I am somebody who is interested in the classics. I'm interested in the future. I'm interested in juxtaposition and context and storytelling. And I'm interested in many things that exist in the world that I'd like to put together when I feel like a client hires me and allows me the ability to pick from that field,
Mm-hmm.
and then whatever's created is created. So I really don't think about it like I have a style or a formula or I'm a particular kind of architect. I don't even think of myself as an architect. I think in a broad space as a designer. I think about furniture and objects and spoons and forks and cars and houses. And so I think that's the kind of architect slash designer that I am.
Very interesting. So let's talk about the greenhouse project, and then we'll, since you brought that out, I think you know, greenhouse in India as a concept is fairly less spoken about. Largely, they do
Yeah.
exist, but you know, so yeah, if you can share a little bit more insights, I think that would be great.
So I think particularly in COVID, I noticed that when the lockdown happened initially, there was just such a incessant amount of chatter about sustainability, and everybody's on sustainability, and you've got
Mm-hmm.
to go green, and such a reaction to the problem. And
Yep.
I think when you are, let's say, an architect who's interested in the future, whether you like to uh, say it about yourself or you don't, you are interested in being some sense of a visionary, or having a vision of the future. And 4 years ago, when I like I said, I started, when I started the 5 year plan about, getting involved in design TV and working abroad,
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that there was going to be a time that, the way that we live, and the way that we eat our food, and the way that we react with the environment is going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And, as an architect, you really do observe and look at the cities that you live in, like the city that we live in, as much as we want to extol the virtues of how well we've done, and, how much economic progress we've made, the quality of life that we offer our inhabitants is fairly low. It's
Mm-hmm.
fact.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you ask yourself, what can you do about it? And what you can do about it is that maybe there's that one project and one client where you have a demonstrational vehicle about your vision of the future. So my vision of the future is definitely green, and it's also classic. There are bits and pieces that I pick up.
Mm-hmm.
So in this particular house, we studied, the initial courtyard planning of a house that dated back to, like, 2000 years. So there is an aspect of looking at Indian architecture and philosophy in not such a traditional way,
Mm-hmm.
but only whereas it's necessary to tell the story of this project and this client.
Okay.
So I started working on this project, and we wanted to do things a bit differently, and it came out of the context. So in the context on farmland, you're
Mm-hmm.
not allowed to build a concrete roof,
Yep.
and you're supposed to build a quote unquote temporary roof.
Yeah.
And so this temporary roof was had to be metal. It
Mm-hmm.
had to be disassemblable, and so it ended up being aluminum, and aluminum is waterproof, and then you can generate these green solutions.
Yeah.
And then the issue becomes that, all right, if you're going to take a risk and you're going to build this, and you want it to last, then what are the criteria that you need to apply to it? So the criteria you need to apply is that, okay, maybe if it's flat and it collects, it ponds and it collects rainwater because there's
Yeah.
some reflection in the aluminum, then maybe your roof won't last. So you take some time and you decide to maybe, do a sloping roof. But then when you're doing a sloping green roof, you're worried that your greenery will just slough off the roof and fall off in a monsoon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
monsoons are very severe. So this began 4 years ago, where I started to think about the kind of houses I want to build. And I realized that when I got to that point, I was just super excited, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the aha moment for me. This is what all my work has led to. And so I started to design this, and I had a client who gave me a free hand. And when she came into the picture, and she's really kind of inspired my work in so many other ways, and my life in so many other ways. And she just said to me, I've come back from Holland, and I see flowers everywhere, and I see green everywhere.
Wow.
And so we decided that we were just going to do green everywhere.
Hmm.
That's the initial concept of that. But somehow it coincided, as you say, magically coincided with this idea of doing work that was a little bit more responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, when everybody started to murmur and make these noises about sustainability, we've got to get sustainable and we've got to do this. I had already built the house,
Mm.
and I got to speak about it in Italy in Design Week
Yep.
last year.
Yeah.
Tesla Motors invited me to speak about the project. And so I think this kind of work is essentially what I'm going to be pushing moving forward. It
Mm-hmm.
is going to be a mix of the classics and the future, and it's going to have a sustainable or green component. I am engaging a lot of experimentation using 3D printing for houses and to use solar and to, generate our own food. Let's say you've got a roof surface that can generate its own food because you've taken away
Wow.
that that surface from the ground, and maybe being able to recycle your water more cleverly and lower the temperature of your house, because green roofs are essentially fantastic at that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the key realization that I got when I went to Milan to speak at the Politecnico.
Mm-hmm.
The focus on the discussion was on how we just lowered the temperature of the house by 4 or 5 degrees in summer. So if you didn't have an AC or you just had a fan, it was enough for you to have a very pleasant environment in the house. And I think it sounds like a very small thing,
Yeah.
but imagine that if you have, let's say, a few 100 million houses that are lowering their temperature by a few degrees naturally,
Mm-hmm.
imagine the load off the electrical system. So, like I said, I think it's this house is a symbol of the kind of work that I believe in and want to do, and I think also a symbol of the work that is really pertinent and relevant to our time now.
Mm. So calling you an architect is actually a criminal offense. You're almost like a space designer, which brings in different aspects, sustainability being a big one, and then also bringing in experience. Because if I look at some of your designs, whether it's private houses, it's master plans, buildings, some of the interiors you've done, as well as you've also designed some furniture. So it's not just, you're not just, yeah, the profession may be an architect, but calling you an architect is actually not right. At least that's what you know, I stand corrected in a many ways.
Yeah, I
So
think that's fair. I mean, if you see that, I don't really. There are a lot of people that push architect after their last name. When
yeah,
they have a calling card or they have
yeah,
any communication. But that's not really important to me. I remember something that one of my professors said to me when I was studying.
hmm,
And when I was studying, it was particularly difficult for me because I didn't have a lot of resources, and I was working, and I worked at the cafeteria, and I was giving tuitions in English, and I wasn't sleeping enough, and I was really frustrated with the program
hmm,
because I just felt like my learning was had to happen this very linear way, and I had this very kind professor. And I remember he came and told me one day I was having this really frustrating day, and he just said, remember that it's not about architecture, it's about creative problem solving. You will get the skills you need to solve any problem anywhere in the world, and it will be done in a creative sense that's different from everybody else. And it really stuck with me. And
hmm,
I won't say that it's something I think about actively when I'm designing, but somewhere in the back of my mind, stored in some brain cell somewhere, is this idea that you don't have to be restricted to that. You don't have to be restricted to this idea. There will be a problem that will come up that a client will bring to you, and then you just creatively problem solve it. And in that case, if it's a house and you want to call it architecture, you can. And if it's a chair that you're sitting on and you want to call it like a
yeah,
furniture designer, then that's what you do. But I don't really think this is important right now. I think what is really important is design, and good
yeah,
design, and design that really kind of helps people move forward, whether it is sustainably or just emotionally or visually or physically,
hmm,
whatever that is. I think that I would then like to be seen as a designer. And I think my practice moving into Europe has been focused on quote unquote being a designer rather than being an architect.
very interesting. So why Barcelona of all the places in Europe?
The Barcelona story is actually very strange because uh, I maybe I think I had a past life connection with
Okay.
Barcelona. I think it's one of those crazy serendipity meets instinct meets destiny or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it. I think so. Each individual, I think, has some manifest destiny, and I think has some markers about what they're supposed to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I remember there was a particular moment where I was watching my first Spanish film, which was all about my mother
Mm-hmm.
by Pedro Moldovar. And there's a very particular scene, and I mean, this is a little bit of a long story, but I think this is something I'm happy to share because most people don't know this about me, and I think this could help people someday. So there's a scene in the movie, and where Penelope Cruz is. Um, it's her last scene because she's going to die in the next scene, and she has to go see her parents, and she can't tell them that she's dying, but she just wants to say goodbye to them. And so she goes and says goodbye to her mother, and then she goes to say goodbye to her father. And the scene is that she's in this black car, and she's sitting with her friend, and she's very emotional. And the car pulls up into a plaza, and she pulls the window down and she whistles. And there's this dog that comes running to her, and plodding behind comes the father.
Mm.
And she looks at the dad, and the dad looks at her, and he says, "How old are you?" In Spanish. And she says, 28, Papa, like in Spanish. And he doesn't recognize her because he's got Alzheimer's, and that's the scene. And it's filmed this plaza, and and so this is the last time she sees her father. In the next scene, she dies. The scene just got stuck with me. The
Mm.
scene, the environment, the street, and it was filmed in a place called Plaza Medinaceli.
Mm.
And Plaza Medinaceli is, it's on the waterfront. It's a fairly quaint square in Barcelona.
Mm.
So, anyways, I remember this scene, and I watched the movie, and I called my mom. And that time I was in LA, and I called my mom in Mumbai, and I told her, there's this great movie, you must watch it. And it was a movie that made me had a deep and profound respect for single parents because my mother is a single parent. So I said, you really need to watch this movie. And I don't know why, but I think someday I'm going to go to Spain.
Mm.
And so, I watched it. It was very powerful. It stayed with me for a couple of months, and then it just disappeared out of my system. Cut to, I've finished my education. I've come back to India. I've, started doing my practice, and I'm happy. And this germinal idea again is kind of left dormant.
Mm.
Nothing's happening with it. And so I think when I started to think about traveling and started to think about setting up base abroad, it still wasn't an idea until I I was traveling into London and Paris for work for a client. And then I decided to take a trip to Barcelona, my first trip to Barcelona. And I had a friend, a coworker who was living in Barcelona.
Okay.
And I remember one of the first things that I did was just, and I do this as a habit, even when I went to Italy for the first time and I went to the Biennale for the first time. I do this thing at night or, even in the day or early morning where I just walk the city randomly. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a way to get to know the city. And I remember walking in the city and going to that same spot and having this complete sense of everything making sense
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that this is a moment that kind of aligns with that moment and that I'm supposed to be here. So that was the first indication, very powerful indication that, okay, maybe, you're supposed to be here.
Mm.
And so I started coming, and then I think the dots just started to connect themselves. I got permission from the government. I became a resident. I started working there. I set up a practice, and
Okay.
we did these two wonderful projects there. So I think Barcelona is a great example of what you're trying to do at a personal level in your own life,
Mm-hmm.
matching with what you're trying to do on a professional level. And
Okay.
I think sometimes we get these little signs, and we don't take them seriously, and they pop up in culture and music and movies,
Mm.
and then they leave you with a message or a lesson for the future, and hopefully you're paying attention. And I think that was something that I really did pay attention to. So
Okay.
that led to many other things, and the story continues.
And in telling the story and in the further continuity of the story, I forgot
Okay.
completely to mention why this scene from that movie is so significant exactly. Because, as I said, the scene was filmed in a place called Plaza Medinaceli, and Plaza Medinaceli was the first place I really went to in Barcelona and had that epiphany that I was supposed to be here. But the story really didn't end there, because in 2018 I became member of Soho
Okay.
House Barcelona, and Soho House Barcelona is on Plaza Medinaceli. In fact, I think you can see the Soho House Barcelona building in the scene
Hmm.
of that movie in 2000. So there was a time where I would walk every day to Soho House from my apartment, and I would have my meetings at Soho House, and I would be constantly struck by that feeling, that extremely powerful feeling
Okay.
of maybe synchro destiny, knowing that some part of this is what was intended for you, and the rest was to recognize and act on it.
Sure. So let's rewind a little bit back. And you said in the start, when I asked you the first question, you said you always wanted to be an architect.
Yeah.
What during the childhood, what got you so excited about architecture and design and all of that?
So I'm an extremely visual person. I don't know how I'm built like that, but
Okay.
yeah, I think even when I was a child, I think everything was visual. So I won't say I have photographic memory,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a very keen sense of visuals that stay with me for very, very long.
Okay.
And so I think one of my earliest memories, one of my happiest memories is, playing and drawing with my grandfather. And my grandfather was this very particular and interesting man.
Mm-hmm.
He used to listen to the BBC all the time, and he would have his 2 whiskeys every evening, and loved aviation. So he loved to draw, and he had this very bad hand at drawing, but it
Mm-hmm.
was something that we just did together. So when he was having his whiskeys, we would talk about aviation, and we would make these little drawings of planes, and it was just something that grandfather and grandson shared. So I have that as one of my key memories.
Wow.
And then on Sundays, in those days, I don't know if you remember, but the Trident was called the Oberoi,
Mm-hmm.
and they used to have 2 restaurants,
Yeah.
and one of them was called Samarkand.
Okay.
And Samarkand used to have these Sunday lunches
Okay.
where the families would go and sit on one table, and the children would go and sit on another table. And
Yes.
they had these coloring mats.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were like
No, I
these
remember that. Yeah.
coloring mats.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember that this used to be kind of a Sunday ritual,
Okay.
and I used to draw,
Mm-hmm.
in those lunches. And I think one day he just came to me when I was drawing, and he said, because I used to keep drawing planes, and he's like, "Aren't you tired of drawing planes? Why don't you draw an airport? Why don't you draw more?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was something very strange that he said. He said, "I want you to draw me an airport, and because I want to keep that. And someday I think that I'll show you this airport in the future." Something very bizarre and random, which I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
So I sat on drawing this airport, and I remember taking that sheet home. Like usually you just leave that sheet there.
Yep.
And so I started doing something, and I remember there was a plane I was drawing of KLM taking off,
Mm-hmm.
and there were, I think, 1 or 2 other planes, I can't remember. And then I built a little bit of that airport, and I remember that there was kind of these 2-3 sharp lines on top, which was what must have been the tower.
Okay.
And
So you
so I
had
was
been to
doing
the
this
airport
drawing.
to visualize that, or was it a complete?
No. I think it was just from photos, and it was
Okay.
just stuff that you were picking up from the environment. It was just of interest.
Okay. Interesting.
But I remember that I was making this drawing, and he looked at the drawing, and he said that the structure has more detail than the planes. And I think that was the first thing and the first and the most important thing that I remember. Is that an indication that I was going to be an architect? I don't know. I can't say, obviously. But subconsciously and consciously, I think is something I remember. So it must have some meaning.
Hmm.
And he before he died, he kept saying to me that his big regret was that he couldn't find that, because by that time I was already an architect, and he said,
Yeah.
it was proof that this is what you were meant to do. So I think that story, let's say give or take 30% of detail, which is I think dissolved in time, is I think the first point where I knew that that's what it is. And then I think, of course, over time,
Mm-hmm.
I was just very interested in being creative and doing things that were creative.
Very
And I think once you have a sense of, hey, if you do things creatively and you do it with the spaces that you live in, then you're called an architect. You don't necessarily know that that's your name or that's what you want to do. But I think since that age group of 11 to 13, I had an idea that this is something that I want to be part of. I think, a lot of times people say this is what you want to be. I don't know if I wanted to be that. I just knew that that's something that I want to be part of. And so today I am.
Sure. And, when I look at your career, you started off working for someone and then you started your own company. You were a co-CEO for some company for some time.
Right.
And then you left that, or you probably moved out to work for someone else. And in between, you were also had some modeling stints. But you started back your own company. So how's that been, being a CEO, then working for someone else, and then having your own company back on?
Right. I think for me, it's never really. I think if you talk to some people, they're very clear that they can't work for other people, and some
Mm-hmm.
people love to work for other people.
Yep.
And although now, of course, I'll change my mind and say that no, I can't work for anyone.
Okay.
But at the time when I was studying, I was just so excited by everything that was happening that I really didn't care whether I was working for someone or I was working for myself.
Okay.
And I think the particular time you're talking about being a co-CEO was when I was in San Francisco, and I
Yep.
finished studying. And when I finished studying, I had an opportunity to go back into school and
Okay.
to do my master's. And this was a tricky one because, when you study architecture for 5 years,
Uh-huh.
you're like, oh God, do I really want to go and study another 2 years, and do a master's? Because I think it's time to get out.
Yeah.
And so I started evaluating whether it was something that I wanted for myself. And while I was evaluating it, the only bright spark was that there was a particular thesis that I wanted to work on, which was kind of this modeling of information in real time. So, imagining that houses could be designed in real time, like, you're in the house and you're moving things around with your fingers.
Wow.
And so I was writing this thesis for study at USC,
Okay.
and I happened to show it to my uncle.
Okay.
And my uncle saw it and he was like, oh, this is brilliant. You can do this with information. And if you can do this with information, it can affect how people process information visually. And let's get this idea patented and funded. So we had it patented and got funded, and we raised money for it.
Wow.
And that's how I became a co-CEO in that company. And it was fantastic. We went to Comdex, in Vegas, and were under the Intel brand, and showed this working model of how you would process information visually. And then, of course, the dot-com bust happened. And,
Yeah.
this was an adventure that I went on because I believed in the thesis project that I was creating, and it just became commercial.
Mm-hmm.
So I allowed it to be like that, and I went with it as far as I could. And when the dot-com crash happened, I was like, all right, this is the sign that that's the end of that. And you just kind of get on with what's next. So, like I said, I never really looked at it from the point of view that I'm a CEO or I'm a leader or I'm a worker bee or I'm a manager.
Mm-hmm.
I just went for what excited me about what the project was. And if that capacity was to be a manager or to be a CEO or to be an employee, then that's what I had to do.
Mm.
And I think the context has always been really important for me. Like now I know that whatever I'm designing, I've got to lead. So therefore I must lead, and I'm enjoying that. So when I came back, India was a place where I was obviously starting from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that you do when you come here is that, you you look for a job and you start to gain experience.
Yep.
And I started my first job just like anybody starts their first job. And I remember I went to meet the head of the firm, and I told him, I said, look, Monday to Friday, I'll work my ass off for you day and night, but Saturdays and Sundays I will not come in. So don't
Okay.
ask me to come in on a Saturday and Sunday.
Okay.
And it was because I think by that time it had already started. But I had a friend who shot some pictures and sent it in to, I think it was a production agency, and I got my first gig. I think my very first gig was for Nescafe,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like a TVC. It was shot in Alibag. So this rhythm started where Monday to Friday I was in the office, completely involved in design stuff, and then Saturdays and Sundays, one way or the other, I was either going for meetings or I was traveling. Some of the more extreme ones were when I signed John Players. At that time, it was a really big brand,
Mm-hmm.
and we did all the shoots in South Africa. So we had to fly to Cape Town, and I was flying to Cape Town on like a Thursday night,
Wow.
and calling in sick on Friday, and
Okay.
then coming back to the office on Monday and Tuesday like nothing had happened. And so it was this strange, but highly enjoyable and very memorable experience to have. But it was very focused. Like I knew that I don't want to get out of this design business that I'm in, and I like the freedom, and I like the travel, and I like the stepping out of this life where when you dress up and you pose and you kind
Mm.
of project something, but you just do it for that moment,
Yeah.
and it's an experience, and then you leave it.
Yeah.
So the modeling bit just for 4 years it continued. It was quite good in the sense that compared to most people, I wasn't looking at that as the source of my income, and I wasn't looking at it as something that
As a career.
I'm going to now become an actor or a
Okay.
TV star. And although I did get some offers, it just was nothing that I wanted to do.
Mm.
I was pretty clear that I don't want, and I'm not seeking the adoration of a public, and I'm not an entertainer by heart. I'm a fairly private person, but I do enjoy this idea of experience and travel and projection.
Okay.
And so as long as it worked, so it worked for about 4 years when I was working in a job and I was doing things on the side. And then I think John Players was my last campaign because I was signed with them for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they renewed the contract for another year. And when the contract was over, I just took it as a sign, and I was like, okay, it's time to get out.
Okay.
And then I started Archilogics. And so that was the story of how those were running in parallel till I started the practice.
Very interesting. You spoke about few things which have really sparked interest in me because, ironically, I'm doing a design thinking course as we speak.
Mm.
And you spoke about design thinking. You spoke about the 3D printing piece where you use a lot of 3D printing. And you spoke about your patent in your earlier years where you had this real time. So, how is technology in many ways and the concept of design thinking and design, what you actually do, all interplay? How do you use all of these three together?
I've had this argument with so many people because I think prior to COVID, everybody used to feel in the design profession that working with hand and sketching and
Mm-hmm.
basically keeping a less technological approach somehow brings you to a greater level of authenticity in your design craft. That you're
Yeah.
moving away from this, you're moving into machine made, and you're moving into technology, and so somehow you're obliterating the craft, and you're obliterating this idea of history that we have with the way that we used to create things. But I think that if you've seen since the start of time, when design even originated, because of the Industrial Revolution, there was always this idea of hand plus.
Yep.
It was always the hand and some sense of machining that continued, and that's always been part of us and every industry, and even
Mm-hmm.
the design industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's inevitable that technology is um, going to make a bigger play every time with the design process with designers,
Mm-hmm.
and I've embraced it. I think for me, using your hands is the same as using a line on a computer screen.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a craft at the end of the day, and it's a tool. It's in your hands. And I think technology, let's put it this way, is inevitable. Like, for example, the time that we're living in, if you didn't want to be social or you didn't want to be on social media
Mm-hmm.
pre-COVID, it may have been okay. Now you know that it's impossible.
Yeah.
And I think that many of the activities we carry forward on a daily basis are all carried forward on technology. For example, this conversation.
Yeah.
So I just feel like in the industry, you can't turn around and say that I don't like technology, so I'm going to ignore it. I think that's just putting your head in the sand and pretending like this is just going to be okay. So I think technology is key, and I mean, for me, the last couple of months I spent digitizing my office. So a lot of the paper assets were scanned away and uploaded to a cloud, which is something I've never
Wow.
done.
Okay.
And I've destroyed most of my paper files. I've thrown away things because I don't need it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a cleverer way where I can search for that data visually online really quickly. There's no way I'm going to be able to look through 15, 16 years of paperwork,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to destroy it. So I think there is some good that comes out of it. A lot of my drawing work and design work is now on an iPad. I don't have any paper. I'm trying not to print any paper,
Nice.
and I have digital diaries of my sketches and design ideas. So they're all always uploaded in the cloud, and this stuff is coming with its own problems, of course. But
Yep.
so does paper, and so does the traditional craft. So I think you just have to choose. But I feel like whether you choose or not, predominantly the direction is that you're going to have to be prepared for a very highly technological future.
Okay. So you're a big pet lover. I can hear that. So apart from pets, what other interest you have apart from design? And I would.
That's a really hard question.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. I think I have a lot of interest. I think life is very interesting. Travel
Okay.
is interesting. The arts are interesting. I think if you look at design as a sort of nucleus and
Yeah.
got all these little spokes coming out of it, it's all aspects of life, really. I think people are interesting
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. I think I'm just fundamentally curious about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is whatever I'm most curious about is where I see an application of myself most intensely. And so that could be, let's say, fitness, for example.
Okay.
So if I'm interested in fitness, then I'm most curiously and most passionately involved in that. So I think any aspect that just speaks to me, I guess.
Very interesting. Saket, now talking about you, but do you have somebody to look up to in from a design or from an architecture perspective, like whom you either draw inspiration or whom you consult if the person is living and engage, like a mentor?
Hmm. Um, I think there's, let's say I should give sort of a spotlight to a couple of people, I think, whether they've had to do with building who I am personally or just career inspiration. I think on the career inspiration level, I think Zaha Hadid is probably the most powerful career inspiration. And I think not because of the projects that she put up, but I think from a personal point of view, because when I started my career and when I started studying, I struggled a lot. So when I was modeling, it was a chance for people to say that, why are you giving a model work, for
Mm-hmm.
example. And when I did a good job or a good project, it was like, okay, it's a fluke. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, this fluking of projects year after year just continued.
Yeah.
So I think that you know what it's like to face resistance from
Mm-hmm.
stupidity
Yeah.
and from quarters where the thinking is irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, she's probably a symbol of that. She faced a lot of stupidity and irrationality in the design profession. I think because she was a minority, she wasn't very pretty. She didn't cut a very svelte figure. Um, she obviously was a woman, in this profession, you're a minority, and then Iraqi, and then going into London and being offered by one of the greatest architects to partner and saying, no, I don't want to partner with you. I want to have my own. And then struggling for 20 years of paper projects, 20 years
Wow.
of, just being pushed down and being told that the work isn't, as relevant. And then I think the third project she did in that span of 20 years just exploded. And I think before her death, she was, you know, uh, pushing a yearly income of maybe a few hundred million pounds, and with one of the largest design offices in London. So I think that story of the person is extremely inspirational. Of course, the work is incredible too, and what she was trying to do with the work nobody had ever done.
Okay.
So I think that connection between person and work, quite incredible. So that's inspiration for me at the design level. On a personal level, I think the family's always been very inspirational in their own ways, because my family will do, and my family people in many ways have always done very average things in an extremely unaverage manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sticks with you. I think in terms of mentors, living mentors, I think my current client is a living mentor. And I'm not very easily impressed with people, let's put it this way.
Okay.
I think that when people get successful and they have money, their behavior changes. There is a sense of extra confidence. There is a sense of extra superiority. There is a sense of that, since I'm making so much money and I'm able to have more freedom to do things that maybe you don't, that I know more than you,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'm cleverer than you and smarter than you. And so when I met this client, she had all these resources, and they just seemed to exist parallelly to her. She really seemed to be the master of these resources and not vice versa. Like,
Wow.
if I would see her step out and she would be dressed very averagely, but she would be in a very fancy car, or there was never this sense that I am fettered by this idea of materiality. And so I think that's super inspirational. She's a mentor because I think she's allowed me to build this kind of project without even questioning me once. And just,
Mm.
a lot of the design discussions went literally like looking at each other, like, this is what I want to do. What do you think? Yeah, go ahead. And, it was literally like that.
Okay.
So I think for me, I really aspire to a place that when you are really successful in whatever aspect that you are successful, that the world deems you to be successful. So
Mm.
whether it's fame or money and material gain, and you are somebody who hasn't used that to change who you are, just to prove even more to people that you are different and better than them,
Okay.
then I think it's extreme. Because I think if you can be comfortable with yourself having more or less of anything, then I think there's something truly exceptional about you. And I think the final quality with her is, she's always beaming and she's always happy. And I'm like, where is this coming from? I know a lot of people with money who are quite unhappy,
Yep.
with their lives. And it's strange, right? You would think that the
Mm-hmm.
more successful you are, the happier you would be.
No, it is inverse actually.
So yeah. So I think it's these three levels of inspirations. I think there's the professional inspiration of Zaha Hadid, then the personal examples of average things done fantastically in the family, and then this aspirational, beatific, future forward, completely non-material but present and working with materialism, kind of example and the client of mine.
So you are drawing inspiration, but let's say somebody has to draw inspiration from you, and there are a lot of as aspiring architects right now, either pursuing education or coming into the market and trying to look out for a job. What would you recommend to them?
This is something I get asked a lot. Sometimes I do these Instagram Q&As, or
Sure.
sometimes people just write to me and ask me this question. In fact, I just took on a new intern,
Okay.
and I was looking at the work and I was giving her some feedback. And I think the key before you even get to what is the feedback on a project or, what you're doing currently, is really to ask yourself the big question, do you really love design and architecture, and do you really want to be part of this profession? Because it's not an easy profession.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes you about half your life to figure out what you've had to learn,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is from a creative aspect or a technical aspect or just a sociological or psychological aspect that you can then take back as a solution for a client. So you really got to be serious about whether it's something you see your life being enmeshed with. And I think when you're an architect, I think it really does take over a lot of your life. So I think you want to ask yourself whether that's you or not. And if you are somebody who wants to use it as a job, then that's fine too. But you need to be clear in the beginning that, is this something that is just a job for me, or is this a way of life? So there are those two different directions.
Yeah.
And then I think when you get into the market, I think, of course, everybody wants to be famous and wants to be successful and thinks that they have the best design skills and, there's nobody better than them. And that's not true. So I think the advice that I give a lot of people is that just learn, just have fun with it, and take every intensity and challenge as part of the process of evolving as an architect, as a designer. It doesn't need to be so black and white that you will do this and you will do this and then you will get there. And so I always advise them also to just go slow, because I think sometimes people are in a hurry. They want to, let's say they've got 2 years or 3 years of experience, and I just want to start on my own,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to have my own name. And I always counsel them and tell them that it's not so glamorous and it's not so important to have your own name. I mean, you can have your own name by working with a group of great people.
Mm-hmm.
And in any ways, if you see the future is really hinging on collaboration, and the time and idea of superstars is really in question, I think what's in question is really great work. And you want to be seen, I think, with a great group of people, whether there are people who are drafting your designs or visualizing your modeling, or people who are executing your projects. I don't think it really matters.
Okay.
So this very linear perception that people have that, I'm going to get into the design industry and then I'm just going to become this architect. And I think also in our industry, we see that the nexus between media and PR and, working and networking is designed to make people believe that that's the culture, So my belief is contra. And so I just tell students that it's just such a great privilege to be working in this if you're really excited about it. Even for me today, after all these years, when I wake up in the morning, I'm excited to go design. I'm excited to go sketch.
Yeah.
So I think if you just keep that in mind, I think you're good.
Okay. So on that note, I think, Saket, this has been wonderful, and I'm sure the people who will be listening the show, there's a lot to learn and gain. And so thank you for taking time out from your busy design schedule. I'm sure the creative juices will flow more. And I look forward to more peculiar designs which you do, because it's interesting, and I would highly recommend people to go on your website, on your company's website, and look at some of those breathtaking designs which you have come up with.
Thank you so much, Anish.
Thank you. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening in. And we close yet another episode of Masters Decoded. If you've enjoyed the episode, please, you can help us out by sharing it on social media. I would personally appreciate that. It's how we can reach more listeners, and the more listeners we have, the more awesome guests I can get in touch and convince to participate in these conversations that are a joy to have for me, and I hope they are a joy for you to listen as well. You can also help a lot leaving reviews on iTunes or your podcast service of choice. Reviews are surprisingly helpful in supporting the podcast to get to more listeners. If this episode has intrigued you, I would request you to subscribe to the podcast to stay up to date and get notified to the future episodes. With that, I bid you and see you in the next episode.